despite a little bit late because of the program today. We will be projecting soon what is the topic that we will be discussing today. But we have heard during the days, this morning, about a lot of issues related to inequalities. And that is one of the topics that we will be going to go more in details with 3 speakers that we will be inviting. It's important that we use the mic, because we will have a second part that we will interact with the participants, because we are recording the event here, and it's important that your voice is kept for record. So I would like to welcome you again. And the session for this afternoon is Challenges of Inequality and How Inequality is Understood, Challenges of Colonial and Political Legacies. In all the previous sessions, we saw and you heard about the root causes, but also the dynamics that you are facing today in terms of political polarization, reforms, that sometimes are exacerbating now the issue of the colonial legacies and the political legacies that we had globally. So how, in this session today, we will try to focus on the global perspective, but also trying to get some elements from South Africa, especially in terms of the post-apartheid that has a big element related to these legacies, political and also colonial. And we will have a panel of 3 eminent people that are working globally, locally, and regionally to help us to discern a little bit these discussions. We have, as a discussions launchers for these sessions, Mr. Maurice Bloom. He is from the Joint Learning Initiative. I ask you, please join us in front here. Imam Dr. Talib Sharif. He is the president of the International Coalition for Peace and Reconciliation. He is arriving. Please take your seat, Imam Talib. And also Christo van der Ried. He is the executive director of FW, the Clerk Foundations, but also a lecturer at the Stellenbosch University here in South Africa. So basically, today we will be listening from them as a launcher for the discussions and then bringing different perspectives. We had other, as you probably saw in the program, that has changed, that some of the other people that were listed in the original program were not able to join this session. So we will miss a little bit part of the South Africa legacy, the political legacy, because Professor Dr. Mathole Mosshekga, he's not able to join us here today. So I would like to recall that we will be recording this session. So, and we will have 5 minutes for the initial discussion from the launchers. Someone will be helping you at the back about the timing, so we will not be surprised when we will receive this time. And I would like to start with Maurice, with a question, suggest some questions to you. How do you see historical inequalities continuing to shape global power structures today from a global perspective, considering the organization that you are leading?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maurice Blooms. I work for JLI. You know, you have to. I was asked to contribute to this important session at the last moment, so I was kind of on the bench, and then I, came here in front of you. I did make scribbles, so you have to, forgive me that I might read. One of the things, though, is when I was looking at the schedule of today, and I looked at the room where we are in, it struck my, was kind of interesting because I don't know if you realize that we are gathering in the Vasco da Gama room. So, you know, we cannot ignore the significance of its name, right? He was celebrated as a pioneering navigator, but his voyages also marked the beginning of centuries of European imperial expansion into Africa and Asia. His expeditions opened the sea route to India, where he also brought violent domination of trade routes, attacks on coastal communities, and the imposition of foreign systems over local economies and cultures. So in this sense, the very name of this room is a very living example of how colonial legacies are embedded into our spaces, even in the rooms where we now meet to discuss how to dismantle inequality. So when we speak about inequality through the lens of colonial and political legacies, we must acknowledge that many of today's development systems still reflect those old patterns, centralizing decision-making, marginalizing local voices, undervaluing the deep wisdom within communities. So, as I mentioned, since the end of 2023, I have had the privilege of joining the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. And this is really, you know, a great organization. Actually, it's much more than an organization. It's a representation of a community of NGO workers and academics that are working together, especially on what we call the double literacy gap. So development actors often lack religious literacy, and faith actors often lack development literacy. And that gap helps to sustain inequality. At JLI, through our community, we developed a fair and equitable approach about dismantling that, centering historically excluded voices, co-leading research and building mutual understanding. So we have examples of work where we were able to work on that. We are now, after we made in 2021, 2022, the State of the Evidence report, we are now flipping the script and working on the State of the Evidence Navigator, where we aim to, for indigenous researchers being able to publish also in their own languages, influencing national strategies that once overlooked their knowledge entirely. So, you know, through that, we hope that we are really flipping the script, as I said, from extraction to co-creation, from short-term projects to mutual learning ecosystems that are led by communities themselves. So we hope that we can combine spiritual wisdom with empirical evidence to create not just development programs, but movements for justice. So as we sit here in a room named after a figure who symbolizes the start of colonial domination, let it also be a reminder of why we are here, to reimagine systems, redistribute power, and ensure that historically excluded are not just present, but are leading the way to more just and equitable future. Hey, I did it, huh?
All right, congratulations. Thank you very much, Maurice. I would like now to pass the mic to. It's working. To Christoph van der Ried, and if you could, what is the most pressing? How to address the socioeconomic disparities rooting in political systems and governance failures, and how can interfaith contribute for that?
Thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity to talk to the issues that we face at this point in time. Now, I just want to share a few statistics. I didn't suck this out of my thumb. I look at South African Revenue Service, Treasury, Statistics SA, the Reserve Bank, Auditor General, and others. And I looked at the documents that they have shared during last year and also the beginning of this year. Now, listen to this. South Africa's debt and debt service cost continue to rise and debt service costs are projected to grow faster than economic growth, implying that even under an optimistic scenario, the economy cannot sustain the level of debt. Second issue that I picked up, the latest quarterly labor force survey shows that 10.3 million young people between the ages of 15 and 24 were unemployed in the first quarter of 2025. That's the official figure. I think there's a story doing the rounds that approximately 60 to 65% of young people are unemployed at this point in time. Another statistic that I found quite shocking is the following. The underspending of grant allocations, accumulating customer and municipal debt, and inadequate progress in revenue collection across South Africa's 257 municipalities pose a serious threat to service delivery. Over the past few years, municipal debt owed to Eskom has spiraled out of control. It rose from 74 billion at the end of March 2024 to 94.8 billion at the end of December 2024. The World Bank regularly publishes a global human capital index. This index measures which countries are best at mobilizing their human capital, the economic and professional potential of their citizens. It thus measures how much capital a country loses through lack of education and health. South Africa at this point in time was number 132. The top 10 countries in the survey of 169 countries in the 2020 Human Capital Index were Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, and so forth. And then last but not least, the Auditor General has found that, or she reported that 22 billion rand in wasteful expenditure, irregularities, suspected fraud and corruption happened at the municipal level. This despite the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that South Africa has an abundance of resources. Our mineral wealth is next level. If you compare what we have in terms of mineral resources, in terms of agricultural output, countries like South Korea, such as Japan, Singapore, they can only dream in terms of what we have at our disposal. But if you compare those countries, the way they've created opportunities for their citizens, how they've created wealth with a little bit of resources that they have, and focusing on technological advancement as opposed to us with an abundance of resources. Our focus and our mineral resources is actually a curse because we have never learned actually how to create value. We've extracted it on the basis of cheap labor, and the end result is a situation which we're going to find very difficult to overcome in terms of unemployment, in terms of closing the inequality gap. But a lot of these issues that we face are own goals that we've scored due to poor leadership, due to corruption, and due to pure incompetence. And that needs to be said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we got some elements related to the global powers and the impact and the legacy of colonizations moving to this socio-economic impact that was shared by Christo, especially in the context of South Africa. And now I would like to ask to Iman Talib. No. Yeah, that's the second part. We will hear that is expected. So basically, now we will hear from Iman Talib Sharif. What is the political and ethical leadership, how the political and ethical leadership intersect with to reduce inequality? And what role do spiritual values play in shaping this agenda? So we are coming from the global perspective, taking the case of South Africa, but now going back to the US, that there is also a lot of elements associated with this question. So.
Yeah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a good question for me. I'm one that has come from, and I'm representative of a group that really has been transformed, produced by the community that made way for Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X. I'm directly associated with that community, and I'm on the shoulders of that work. And the biggest demand was for freedom, justice, and equality. And of course, equality was that piece. And because inequality is really probably the biggest test of our time. And so we're talking about, you know, the political legacies when you talk about the political framework right now, and then how does ethical leadership intersect with that. Ethical leadership is, again, not necessarily just religious. That's the second part of this question. We'll deal with the religious side. But one of the things that ethical leadership has to do is see if there are any gaps when he looks at that political framework, and how, say, are there any gaps? Was anything dropped? And drop, I'm gonna use drop as an acronym, DROP. And these are the things. If these things are missing, then this is where they have to be reconciled. The D is for dignity. Is there dignity when you look at this framework that's in the politics? What's put in place? Something taking away somebody's voice, how they're being treated. The dignity piece has to be there. That's the D. The R is, and now you look at the resources. You know, we know some people, if you look at it, you see that there's some people in certain areas that are marginalized, they got degraded circumstances. We were just, in fact, I just in Saudi Arabia. U.S. sent me there, and I had to speak to different leaders, and I spoke to the Shiite leader. And they're in the South. And they were saying that they were not being looked at as equal citizens in Saudi Arabia. But they say Saudi sees them as being connected with Iran. But they say they're not Iranians. They say we're Saudis. This is where we are. But they were not getting the resources because of the way they seen them. Now, so that's just an example. And of course, we know that happens all around. The O is for opportunities. Are the opportunities available for all in the society under that political framework? So this is a part of the ethical leader trying to reconcile that. And then the P is because power. Are there opportunities for the least to rise up to power as well? Now the responsibility of religious leaders also in this equation, a part of the question is, first of all, they have to bring in the moral compass. That's their job. That's our job. This is a religious interreligious faith. That's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to bring in the moral compass, and of course, with 80 to 85% of the world associated with faith, then that really is a lot of power that hasn't really been leveraged. And of course, this is why we're coming together now, trying to leverage that power to put it before those who now orchestrate the political piece of the G20. And so that means also that religious leaders, they have to look at the structures, because first of all, as a person of faith, you have to go back to the number one piece. Everybody are created the same. It's a Allah Sawai. And God speaks to the soul of the human being. Everybody has a quote-unquote human soul that's completely 100% equal. It has no color, has no taste. You can't see it, but it's human and it's universal. And it goes back. God said we are created for one soul. So everything has to be on the basis of seeing everybody in that one soul. The flesh and everything else counts for that less than some percent. 99% on the outside, we're the same. So they have to make sure that the education is in place, institutions are in place, the business education is in place to make sure that everybody gets equal treatment under that political framework. If not, then the religious leader's job is to, again, work with the ethical leaders, who may not necessarily be religious leaders, to make sure that we balance out that political framework that's in place that goes against, puts in, drops things that create these gaps in what we call the DROP. That's about on time. Okay.
Thank you very much. So, as it was mentioned before, that is these sessions this afternoon and the following one is for us to produce actionable proposals and actions, as it was requested by you, from this discussion. So be prepared. I will have some follow-up questions to the panel, but think about that as well, as we will be going back to the plenary or to get your proposal as well. That will be recorded and summarized, and it will be included in the outcomes of these sessions and the wider Interfaith Forum here in South Africa. So we got, and Iman, you have already put some recommendations in terms of how that should be done, but we need to be sometimes more pragmatic and intentional and prophetic, as it was mentioned this morning, in terms of the actions that you do. So how can religious and spiritual leaders, because that was the question that Amanda, that was moderating the session, the plenary session now asked, how can implement practical solution for inequality? How will you address this point from an interfaith perspective? And what are the lessons that South Africa offers to other societies, the journey that you had in terms of discrimination, in terms of all the legacies that we have in the country, and the impact that you mentioned in terms of economic and social impacts, how other societies can learn from that as well. And what are innovative partnerships to shift north-south imbalances? So to take any of the questions or the three of them in very quick, in 1 minute or two maximum.
1990 was a turning point in the history of South Africa when President de Klerk, the then president of the apartheid regime, made very, very important announcements in Parliament in terms of unbanning of the ANC, the release of President Nelson Mandela, also doing away with apartheid and creating a solid foundation for our constitutional democracy. What followed after that was nothing other than miraculous. We had peaceful, voting on the 27th of April. When was that? 1994. We've seen millions of people lining up to exercise their vote. The bulk of our people in South Africa, it was the first time that they could ever vote in more than 300 years of existence. That day is known as Freedom Day, up to today. Secondly, a constitution was negotiated and is regarded internationally as a brilliant constitution. It speaks to three very, very important building blocks. And all of our legislation, all of our actions by government and by civil society must be aligned with those three building blocks. First building block speaks to human dignity. Second building block speaks to equality. The third building block speaks to human rights and freedoms. Those are very, very important biblical principles that are embedded in those values. And you ask yourself, what went wrong after 30 years that we find ourselves in the state that we find ourselves as a country? I've mentioned high unemployment, corruption, etc., etc. And our country has become more polarized than ever before. The solution lies in going back to the founding principles of South Africa. Have a relook at our constitution. It mentions three things that must happen in terms of service delivery to our people at municipal level, at provincial level, at national level. One, there must be openness, there must be transparency, there must be responsiveness, and thirdly, there must be accountability. Basic things that are critical for the advancement of our people. And that's why we have, at this point, last year, the legacy foundations came together to conceptualize the idea of a national dialogue. If I had my way, I would have called it a national action plan, because people are fed up of dialogues. But the idea of this national dialogue is to motivate our citizens to become active citizens, to take ownership of democratic processes, and also to empower themselves to become self-organizing in the sense that they themselves start to take ownership in terms of improving conditions at grassroots level, but in so doing, hold those accountable that we elect into positions of power. The strange thing is that we have the power in our hands to change things for the better through our votes. Why is it that we've become paralyzed and that we don't exercise that vote to change lives for the better? Instead, people have decided, during election last year, not to vote. Almost 50% of voters of Africa stayed away from exercising a fundamental human right. In other words, we need to do much more to instill confidence in our people and especially restore their confidence in democracy. And that's the purpose of what we're trying to seek through the national dialogue. Unfortunately, that process has now been compromised to a certain extent. Hopefully, we will be able to bring it back on track. But we can only bring it back on track on one condition. It must be a bottom-up process, not a top-down, because we run the risk, if it becomes a top-down process, that political parties can abuse it and misuse it to advance their sectarian interest.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christo, for this. That is very important. Iman, from the religious leaders, what they can do in terms of addressing these issues of inequality, from your perspective?
Well, religious leaders, they have to educate. I mean, they come from the highest source of education. They have to educate. That's essentially what took place in America, and because we saw ourselves with some shared experiences with what took place here in South Africa. In fact, my leader, late leader, Imam W.D. Muhammad, he contributed several thousands of dollars to Mandela even before. We just felt, and some of our people were locked up protesting. But look at what happened, and of course it was religious leaders that sparked this now. And I agree with the national, but I do think the dialogue has to be there too. But they have to be together, dialogue and the movement has to be there. Look, in the circumstances in America, and you all know this now, there was the people out of the diaspora of Africa that were removed from the process of being human beings. Not even mentioning citizenship at this point. They were just removed from that process, not even seen as being human. Then it went from a stage of being seen as 3/5 of a human being, and that was documented. And then it went from that to the Jim Crow period, where now there's this second-class citizenship. There are two laws, and then there's second-class citizenship. And then you have the citizenship. This was the piece pushing towards citizenship. Citizenship kicked in, but then it was not justice in administering the laws. There was one law, but there was no justice in administering the laws. But it took religious leaders coming together. Not just, again, here we are speaking about African Americans, but also other religious leaders came together. If you all can recall in the history, when they were pushing for the rights and the civil rights, really were human rights as well, they were going across the bridge in Selma. It was just the African American leaders. And it was treacherous in terms of what happened to them. You know, John Lewis beaten blood and everything. But then they went back a second time. The second time, they had Jewish leaders with them, Catholic leaders, different religious leaders were with them, and the second time around. And that's what heightened the consciousness of the society. That put a lot of pressure on the leadership. And again, we began to see the laws change and become more permanent. Now, obviously, we got some challenges now, but But the thing is, you can't stop. It has to be continuous because there's always, everything is temporary. People come, people go. And that's essentially what happens. So that's why you got to stay the course. You got to teach your children to stay the course and continue to march on.
Thank you very much, Iman. Maurice, you are working for a global organization, Joint Learning Initiative. And you know, we have, in this kind of events, we are discussing, we are imagining together how that could be done. But at the end of the day, not very practical partnerships happen, especially in between the Global North and Global South organizations. What do you need to do to foster this kind of innovative partnerships that we will be very pragmatic and will be benefiting the people, especially those that are leading at community level the response against inequalities?
Yeah, no. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, you know, when I joined, sorry? Is it on? Okay. When I joined JLI, the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, at the end of 2023, you know, the first thing I did is try to talk with as many people as possible from our community. And what I realized that, and I mentioned this in the beginning, but it's really, JLI is not an organization, it's really a community. People are willing to do the work without being even paid. They are invested in it. So, and that is something magnificent. There are certain tendencies that go towards an organization, but what I've tried to, you know, to mirror to the whole community is you are a community. And what we should realize is that at the end of the day, we should be like an octopus. So with independent arms, connected, but with a shared brain and an ethical compass. So that means that, you know, everybody in the different regions is doing their work, but they are not contacted at a certain moment at the end. No, from the beginning they are co-authors of the whole process. And the process is as important as ultimately the product as well. So that's something that I wanted to share. And the other thing is, I will not tell everything about this little ducky, because you should come to B6 to, you know, session B6 to tell the, to hear the full story, with a great moderator. But yes, I understand that this particular ducky goes back to a Western example, because it comes from Sesame Street, and you know, where Ernie, I grew up, no, my children grew up with Sesame Street with Ernie and Bert, but at a certain moment Ernie wants to learn how to play the saxophone. But if you know Ernie, then Ernie always walked around with his ducky. So, you know, he started trying to play the saxophone, but, well, if it works, all the time you heard the streaky sound. So then the band said at a certain moment to Ernie, you know, Ernie, when you really want to learn how to play the saxophone, you need to put your ducky down. So I really think that we all need to think about, do we have one ducky? Do we have several duckies? And it's not that you cannot pick up your ducky, but when you want to start conversations and dialogue, you need to put your ducky down. And because nobody can be wrong, is wrong 100% of the time. So there are always opportunities where you can have that discussion. I think that's what I learned from South Africa. So,
thank you very much. So, again, to the title of our side event here, or the event, Challenges of Inequality, How Inequality is Understood, Challenges of Colonial and Political Legacies. We are living in a very, very strange world today, where values are being attacked, where there is an erosion of values, there is misunderstanding and misinformation that are sometimes changing completely, even theologically, some of the experiences that we have had. So you have heard about the distinguished panel here, different dimensions of that. Now I would like to take this time to go to the audience, to the participants here, thinking about if you have, first of all, any questions related to what they have expressed, but also trying to be very much focused on the pragmatic work that we need to be doing together, actionable things. And I will start with the Abanda, and then two ladies, and here in front. We will have 3 interventions, and then if there is question, we will ask them. Please speak to the mic, because that needs to be recorded.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad I came for this side conversation. I've got 3 comments, or 2 comments and a question. First of all, just looking at the title, in terms of challenges of colonial and political legacies, sometimes it feels like we can't really talk about the colonial legacy, because I think when you raise the issue of colonial legacy, it's like, no, don't go there, you know, there are other solutions. But the reality is we have to understand inequality, also informed from the colonial legacy. And I'll give you just a quick example. During the abolishment of slavery, all former slave owners in the United Kingdom were compensated. The United Kingdom completed the payment, the compensation, in 2015, which meant that even those who came from families that had been slaves, who were working in the UK and paying tax, were paying for the people who had enslaved their ancestors. It didn't address the inequality. It took care of one group of people, and the rest are still struggling to make ends meet. So understanding where we've come from in terms of these legacies is really important for us to see who needs to be supported. That's one. My question is around an example that I think has been, to a large part, successful. China was a poor country in 1970, right? 70% of its population were living in extreme poverty. In the last 40 years, they have lifted over 700 million Chinese people out of extreme poverty. Good economic reforms, fiscal discipline, and something that I didn't understand until very recently, which is that a Chinese child is born and they are taught a vision of that country. They breathe that vision, they work towards that vision, and they're disciplined towards fulfilling that vision. Is there something that we can learn from the Chinese example as people of faith in terms of having that long-term vision, rather than chasing, like this back wheel on the bicycle, chasing the agendas and hoping that, you know, we can contribute a little bit? Is there something that we can come together on, have a vision, and then work towards that particular vision from your experience? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will get other 2 questions, but it's important also just to add as well, of course, we mentioned the case of China, but we know as well the propaganda that exists in terms of that, and that is influencing many governments as well. Do not approach them. Do not take any example of them. So just for complicating a little bit the situation. The colleague there.
Thank you, Prof, for that. So you asked for recommendations to challenge colonial political legacy. And as a social justice educator, I'd like to make some recommendations. I think one thing we need to remember is that colonialism is steeped in patriarchy, and we have seen it doesn't work. And in order to challenge that, we need to be very systematic and conscious all the time of what we're doing. So, for example, and I'm so glad that you're here, by the way. I'm Maurice. But when a speaker didn't show up and we have a panel of 2 men, choose a woman. But I'm glad you're here, Maurice. I really am. So those are just little examples of things we need to be mindful of. Another thing that is really important if we are going to overcome these challenges is to honor our indigenous knowledge systems. Our indigenous knowledge systems, we're talking about how we need solutions with our environment to feed the world, right? They're there. The indigenous people have been doing it forever, and we have to actually relearn from them. And that takes a lot of humility and creating space and giving space and being conscious of our airtime, how much we're taking time up. And are we really truly listening with humility to the voiceless, to the go-go's, you know, the women, the people who really know these systems? And lastly, speaking of indigenous knowledge systems, you know, storytelling, sustainable farming methods, and operating as an organic whole. These are the things that we're trying to relearn. We're saying Ubuntu. This is what we need to learn from our indigenous populations. And lastly, I just wanted to share that I come from the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i tradition, and there's something in our teachings that talks about the people of Africa and the role they have to play as indigenous people in the process of building a one world. And they're seen as the pupil of the eye. That's how they're described in our Baha'i teachings. And the pupil of the eye is where all the light and vision comes. So we need to really be ready to be humble enough to really see, you know, we've all heard, let Africa lead. As a white woman, I'm here dedicating myself and committing myself and inviting others of non-African and non-indigenous descent, and especially our men in the room, to be humble and to really listen to those that have been voiceless for too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important point. The gender justice that we have been promoting and saying, it's a good example in terms of participation, and also the all the panels that we saw here. That's something that we can improve. And also, I think that we have this, what we have mentioning vulnerable groups all the time, like indigenous people, black communities, especially, I'm from Brazil, from South America, where Afro-descendants and women and LGBTQI populations are extremely affected by hate speech coming from religions as well. So it's important that we take that into account. We have for this block the last question for this block, and then I will go for the second one. Mike? And be prepared for the
Thank you. My name is Raj Gavanda. I think I want to strengthen that last input, because as you know, South Africa's constitution recognizes the value of indigenous knowledge systems. Yet in practice, traditional societies often remain excluded from the policy and economic mainstream. In a forum like this, a very important forum, held in a country with such a rich tapestry of IKS, how do we ensure that these systems are not treated as symbolic heritage, but as living, evolving frameworks that can actively shape solutions to inequality, especially in dismantling colonial and political legacies?
Thank you very much. We have one question, but general, very brief comment, 1 minute from the panel, if you want to respond or comment on what you heard now.
Just to give you some facts about China's education system. China, it says here, it has 270 million students and 16 million full-time teachers. That's massive. That's 4 times the size of South Africa's population. And then it says, it goes further, it says that the Chinese system throughout the world achieved top performers in reading, mathematics, and science. So the Chinese have really done remarkably well in terms of investing in education. That makes the big difference. In South Africa, we spent in the region of almost 400 billion rand on education. Our fiscus, or the amount of people that works for government, they cost us in the region of almost 800 billion rand. That's a massive amount of money that we invest in the public sector, in education. The big question is, what is the return on that investment? And I think that makes a difference. To what extent do we hold people accountable for delivering the best education possible? I grew up along the West Coast, here in the Western Cape Province, That was during the time when there was apartheid in affected, impacted on every facet of our lives. But the most amazing thing was that we had the most dedicated teachers during that era, because they said, we will not allow apartheid to dictate your future. And those teachers went out of the way, in the most horrible circumstances, sometimes schools that were dilapidated, etc. But they were absolutely committed, they were dedicated. They opened up a whole world to us that inspired us to, despite the circumstances that we grew in, to grow out of those circumstances and become what we became, despite the limitations that were placed on us. So education system is of critical importance. And yes, just to attach to indigenous knowledge, I grew up Afrikaans. Afrikaans language was the language that they used to teach us mathematics, teach us science, and an entire value chain was created around Afrikaans. Yes, and there's a particular history that Afrikaans was supported by the then apartheid government, etc., etc. But what prevents African indigenous language speakers to create value chains so that at the end of the day, you not only extract the economic value of language, indigenous languages, but you also extract educational value from it and cultural value from it. There's such a lot of things that we can do to take our indigenous knowledge systems to the next level and use it to empower our people educationally, economically, socially, and spiritually.
Okay, thank you very much. I will ask you to be brief because we will go for another round of questions. Okay.
Yeah, on the China question and compared to looking at South Africa right now, education is the #1 priority. Freedom. And again, I have to look at America, and again, there are some parallels to us, and even more so the community that produced Muhammad Ali. That's a whole nother piece that inspired a whole nother movement within America. And because we're from that. Now, there had to be a change in the mentality, the thinking, and of course education was at the core of that. And we had to understand that freedom is to move in the intellect to a greater vision, a greater purpose, and a greater responsibility. And until that is realized, the society that inherited legacies, politics and legacy structures will continue to be burdened by those structures. We were given this thing say, if a person don't treat you right, what makes you think he's going to teach you right? So we knew we had to come from under the systems. Even though physically free, we had to come from under the systems mentally. And so that's the key. A lot of societies, not just China, there are a lot of societies that are teaching their children about the excellence of their own nature first. And in the first place, it starts with God. Everybody's created fi asani tokwing, excellent, in the best of mode. Everybody comes here that way, And our job is to build upon the excellence, to help our children build upon the excellence. We got to teach that and teach them the greatness and excellence as a human being first, and then the history in a society that's excellent as well, from the time that they can begin to understand. And that's what begin to change the mentality, begin to change the thinking as we change the legacy systems.
Thank you very much. I saw your hand there, here, and here. Can you introduce yourself down there?
Hi, yes. My name is Whitney Headland. I'm a master's student at the University of Notre Dame in International Peace Studies right now. And I think one of the things I want to challenge is the idea of the post-colonial period or colonial legacies. I think one of the things that the interfaith role can play is actually acknowledging our current colonization that happens all over the world. We can look at the West Bank, we can look at Palestine, we can look at Western Sahara. And so not thinking about colonial legacies, but active colonization that's happening now. And what is the role of the interfaith space to challenge that, to speak to power? And another thing I wanted to ask is, we'll be talking about education, and I'm curious, because of peace studies, a lot of the things that we talk about is memory. So what is the role of the interfaith space to encourage the memory in the history of slavery and the legacy of slavery and decolonization, particularly in contexts where free speech and knowledge is contested? Like, I'm from the US, so I'm thinking about my context, where diversity is not celebrated, but it's a threat. So what is the role of the interfaith space and our religious leaders to remember our histories, to remember slavery, to remember colonization, and what can that do to liberate us as a people and as an oppressed people? What is the role that you guys see in that?
Okay.
Oh, and generational trauma. What is the role how can we tackle generational trauma in remembering these colonial legacies?
Okay, thank you. And here? And then you?
Thank you. Yes.
If you go very briefly, because then we can allow others
Yeah,
to make the question
Sure,
as well.
sure. I think at the heart of inequality, I believe there is the lack of the belief in the oneness of humanity. So speaking of education, I think the fundamental principle, even though it looks simple, but which may affect profound change in the system, is teaching our children the principle of the oneness of humanity. Unless we understand the well-being of one is dependent on the well-being of the other, we're not, inequality will persist. So how is it difficult to all of us to advocate for the principle of the oneness of humanity to be included in the curriculum?
Yeah, it's a very good point associated with the issue of education, the issue of humanity, how that's part of the curriculum as well.
Thank you. I come from Lebanon. We had a history also of colonization. It didn't, the French colony, it didn't take our resources, but what it did was pit us against each other from different sects and different religions. And this is a legacy that still happens until today and continued in a civil war in Lebanon. So I think it is important to revisit this, and it's important also to hear an acknowledgement from previous colonizing forces of what it has left. And still today, we are seen as a Lebanese society in the eyes of the French as only belonging to this group, or that Muslim or Christian. So it's perpetrated the way we are seen. This is one point I would like to make. The second point I'd like to make is that colonialism is not only a legacy or in the past. What we are living in my part of the world, what is happening in Palestine now, we are seeing a colonialism being done. The decision to invade and to control Gaza, whatever you want to call it, is a colonial decision. Plus the decision 2 weeks ago at the Knesset also for the West Bank also is also a colonial decision. And this needs to be addressed. I think we have, persons from the Jewish faith. I don't know where they stand, but I think this needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed in the recommendations.
Thank you very much. I will follow the people that have raised their hand. We will have three interventions.
I'm a question, a right to reply rather than a question.
Yeah.
There's been 2 comments on Palestine there, and I'd like to reply.
Okay, we are not in a debate on Gaza, Israel, Palestine, but we will give you the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Bishop, and then...
Yeah. My name is Gift Mwerani. I'm from South Africa here. Madam Speaker, in your facilitating processes inside, you raised the issue of the master plan. I find it very difficult, actually, in our conundrum of colonization and so on, to expect change to happen without putting adequate resources for reconstruction. Because now you are pairing the weakest communities with the richest communities. This country, you find the most glaring poverty. Communities that are poor expected to perform alongside very powerful, rich groupings of people. So we need to come with a way. Education, I think it will be one of the way to change the way we orientate society. So, but I really want to pin my argument on how do we deal with the legacy of apartheid, because it is glaring. You drive from airport to Cape Town, you just see it. You don't even have to ask anybody. So yes, we have to fight poverty, but the how part, we are scared as a nation to talk about it. TRC raised these matters of reparation, and reparations are discussed overseas, where companies that benefited or made it possible for apartheid to thrive are being challenged to say, no, you must do something. Why should we have to go to the length of courts to address moral, ethical issues that we could have said, let's put resources actually to uplift those who are disadvantaged?
No, very
Thank you.
good points. Thank you very much. The restoration issue, and that is associated also with the apologies. That's not enough. You know, we need to address the issues, to not repeat and to change the system. I will have you. Sorry, I do not know all the names, but just a reminder that in the scanning the QR code, we will see the bios of all the participants, so you can have that. Please, very briefly, do we have another intervention, and then we will ask to the, because we have about
Good afternoon.
10 minutes.
International institutions are being challenged. The United Nations, the International Court of the Criminal Court, the ICJ. Our country had the bravery and courage to have taken Israel to the ICJ. At this moment in time, South Africa have been economically been challenged with sanctions. And this is the reality. So where the colonial forces, they are still operating. And now I want to ask the question, how do we protect these international institutions to apply the rules and to apply justice and dignity to humanity? Whilst at the same time, I believe if the interfaith community, as we have gathered here, the G20, it does have a role to play and to function. How do we see this particular function becoming true to its vision of wanting to secure the dignity, freedom, to address the issue of poverty, hunger, and what is currently happening? I mean, our sister raised the issue about Gaza. And rightfully so, if you said that you are not wanting to make that a debate or issue. But coming back to the question, what role do we see the G20 playing in protecting the international institutions?
Okay. That's a very good point. And my brother, Jewish, and then we will go for the response.
Okay, thank you.
I know that.
I want to start just by
Very briefly, that's not another discussion that we will have about the conflict, but it's about the topic.
I agree 100%, but after 3 or 4 speakers have now spoken, I believe an opportunity to reply is reasonable. And this is the point I want to make. Okay, I think singling out people because of their faith, which is what happened here, to answer questions about what national governments are doing, identifying people because of your faith, you must be accountable for an answer. This is not equality, this is not justice, this is a problem. On the question of Gaza itself, I think we're probably in agreement. But that doesn't matter. That's actually irrelevant to the question of how we treat each other and how we progress the discussion. There is something, you know, the colonial discussion with Israel is problematic. And I don't mean it's problematic in the way many of you are thinking about it. It's problematic because if you look at your Bible, if you look at the history, if you look at the archaeology, Jewish people are indigenous to that land. Now, I fully support a 2-state solution. My country, Australia, in the last 24 hours has said that they're going to recognise a state of Palestine at the September meeting of the UN. Okay, I don't oppose that, but I do think that there is a need to also make sure we are talking about two states. We are recognising that there are two people, both of whom have claims, and if we don't do that, we're setting it up for potentially a different sort of genocide. And that is what some actors in that region have been pushing as well, and that's not been part of the conversation. So, I think we do need to have mutual respect for everybody and, not hold people because of their faith or even their nationality accountable for what governments do.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Remembering that we are meeting here as interfaith actors. So, of course, there is intersection with politics, with geopolitics, that we cannot escape. But that's the space that we need to have for this kind of discussions. What is generating our motivation for positioning ourselves? It's our faith. It's about the care that we have for our human beings, our neighbors. That's the point that we are. So we will have a lot of opportunities during this week, formally and informally as well, because I think that we could just gather outside and have a discussion about that, because that will contribute for humanity, even for the G20 discussions that will take place in this country. So I'm apologizing for those who have raised the hand, but we cannot have more time because there is another session that most of us will be attending as well, probably bringing some of the insights that came from the discussions. But before that, I would like to give the floor to the panelists for any comments about what was mentioned and asked.
Just in terms of reparations, very interesting. I've read a study by the South African Revenue Services about the issue of wealth tax. Now, what we need to understand, or this is what the study says, is that the moment you start pitching a wealth tax, all that the rich do is they shift their money out of the country. So that for SARS is problematic. Secondly, what they say is there are various forms of wealth tax already, in terms of capital gains tax and so forth and so forth. And then thirdly, we have approximately 7 million people in South Africa that have to submit annual returns. And about 40% of that 7 million bring in 60% of all taxes. So you sit with a monopolized economy, right? And almost a monopolized tax base. And unless we grow this economy to double our taxpayers within the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to sit with dwindling resources flowing to our fiscus. And you know what happens? Either government will have to go and borrow money to sustain their spending, or we're going to have serious trouble in terms of delivering the services that South Africans require. So unless and we deal conscientiously and constructively with the economic challenge that we have in a country that is so well endowed with minerals and resources, you name it, and with human resources, we're going to have serious problems going forward. And I'm not highlighting South Africa because I'm from South Africa. I think it's a case study that's applicable to most developing countries. Thank you.
Iman?
Yeah, so it's a lot of questions. I guess we don't have a whole lot of time, but I do want to, just a few things. I was teaching about the oneness, teaching about the colonization. Again, education, I'll go at education is the #1 priority. And of course, certainly as a Muslim, that's the first thing that begin with read, become educated, and learn. And as for, the present inherits the past. And of course, so you can't escape it. You can't exist without it. And that's why we're all here now, and we're acknowledging that. But any time of people's rightful or legitimate grievances or concerns have been ignored throughout society, have been condemned, and they've never been resolved, they've never been addressed, these things that are disturbing in society, then of course, there's always going to be a segment because of the human soul that we all have. There's always going to be something that rests on the human soul that says it's being disrespected, their human nature is being disrespected, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And it's really going to be saying that I'm being dismissed as a member of the society. And that's what we're going to see. So you can never, so those things are going to have to be addressed in order to be able to move past them. Otherwise, you're going to keep carrying them forward with the other generations to come. If they've never been resolved, there's going to always be an element that are going to be disturbed by that. And you're not going to be able to move forward because that's going to be a weight that keeps holding you down. So we have to find a way within the education system and within the systems to talk about those things, to talk about, and as our sister said, nobody want to talk about colonization. It's like an elephant in the room. No, those things have to be talked about, they have to be taught, and we have to be able to move past that, but we have to build upon our excellence. And if you got to, as our brother said here, if we don't connect our children with the oneness of humanity, that nobody's better than them. God created all of them. They come from him. They're all created perfect, pure, innocent. When you come here, just like Adam didn't have a racial identity, he didn't have an ethnic identity, he didn't have a national identity. When all of our children are born, whatever identity we have right now, they are not conscious of themselves in that identity. They are human. They have all the responses universally of what a child would have. They speak the same language, they want the same things. Later on, they learn the other stuff. So it's about what they learn. Mandela, I love what he said here. Just paraphrase, he said, nobody is taught to hate. So people learn to hate. He said, if hate can be taught, then so can love. And he said, love is closer to the human heart. And he's right. Every child that comes here universally, and this is important, every child that comes universally, a universal picture is that a father and a mother, when they hold their future, that child, their future, they bring it to their heart. They bring it to their heart. Love, that's the foundation. That has to always be an equation, even as we're having these tough conversations. That has to be in the conversation.
Thank you very much. Maurice?
First of all, I'm going to apologize because so many good questions were there and I will not be able to answer those. I just would like to end with an invitation. So I work for JLI and, please, reach out to us. And we are, this community of faith-based organizations and academics of around the world that are working on a number of topics, and it's not always easy. We always have to put the ducky down. My sister always says, that we all carry a backpack around. Well, you see mine. It's extremely heavy. That's why I was, I'm feeling it in my muscles the whole day. But there are times when you are in dialogue with each other that you need to put that backpack down and talk and listen. And actually listen is often more important. A quick anecdote, and I know we have very little time, but I have a podcast, and I do this now for 3 years or so. And in the initial podcast, when I was listening to them, to the recording, I said to myself, whoa, that was really an interesting conversation. Because I was so busy with asking my questions or having an opinion already because, I know where he or she is going with this. I realized that. And so for myself, but maybe for some of you, it's also good to think about, is sometimes not to be too occupied with trying to ensure that you want to share your opinion, but to really listen. And for me, it turns out, well, my wife says I'm a continuous work in progress. I think I'm improving. So please, consider this invitation and really reach out. And that's what people and JLI is also about trying to be a translator, a bridge builder. And for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the inner development goals, but the more secular world developed this issue around why are we not reaching the sustainable development goals? Well, because we did not pay attention to the abilities, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual and as a community. And they developed 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And under that are 23 skills like empathy and listening. you know, humility. Well, when I came across those in the development goals, I thought two things. Wow, those are brilliant. Second, is the faith-based organizations are really doing their work. They know that this is necessary. So maybe that's something to think about.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Before concluding, I would like to ask you, let's recognize the panelists with some applause. Thank you very much for each one of you for participating in these sessions. There is a list that is requested for you to sign with the organization and country. That's important because if you want to get an interfaith gift, your name needs to be there. So don't forget of that. So thank you very much. Sorry. The next session we will start at 5:45. Okay? You have still 12 minutes to sign the list, please.